The term implantation is used to describe the process of attachment of the fertilised egg to the wall of the uterus at the start of pregnancy. In humans, implantation of a fertilised ovum is most likely to occur around 9 days after ovulation. However, this can range to between 6 and 12 days. The zygote that is formed following fertilisation remains within the zona pellucida and begins to move along the oviduct to the uterine cavity. A lot of significant changes take place during this journey, which will be outlined in this video. First, cleavage division occurs during day 1 following fertilisation, and the 2-cell stage with 2 identical blastomeres is formed. Blastomeres are the cells that are produced during cleavage of a zygote and that form the morula, which is a solid ball of identical cells. Following this, there is further division to 4 identical blastomeres. After 3 days, the blastomeres undergo compaction. There is no increase in the overall size of the conceptus during this time. Rather, the cells become smaller. The morula typically reaches the uterus on day 4 and the cells have continued to divide. Over the next few days, these identical cells divide further, forming a blastocyst, which is a hollow ball with an inner cavity containing nutritious fluid called the blastocele. It is important to point out that the wall of the uterus contains glands that secrete nutritious fluid, which initiates the formation of a blastocyst. Some cells are displaced centrally from the periphery of the blastocyst and become the inner cell mass. Cells are no longer identical in size and shape, with 2 different populations now present. The next stage is called hatching. And by the end of the 5th day, the blastocyst is now ready to implant into the uterus. Its protective zona pellucida thins and ruptures, and blastocyst hatches. The blastocyst now has an outer layer of cells called the trophoblast, which are responsible for providing nutrients to the developing embryo. The inner cell mass is still present and is protected from the outside world by the trophoblast cells, and in time will go on to form the embryo. The trophoblast cells give rise to the chorion, which is one of the membranes that surround the fetus while it is still being formed, and also give rise to the placenta that nourishes and maintains the fetus through the umbilical cord. As the blastocyst makes its journey through the oviduct, it provokes a response of considerable magnitude in the uterus. The endometrium of the uterus changes shape and produces a hospitable environment for the embryo and becomes receptive to implantation. The endometrium swells, its glands secrete nutrients, and more blood vessels develop, providing a hospitable environment for the developing embryo. There is only a short window of opportunity that the uterine lining welcomes the developing blastocyst, which is usually between 6 to 10 days after ovulation. Apposition is the very first loose connection between the blastocyst and the endometrium. After the apposition of the free blastocyst at the uterine epithelial surface, the microvilli on the surface of the outermost trophoblast cells interact with the lining of the uterus. This is called adhesion, and the blastocyst realigns itself so that the inner cell mass is adjacent to the uterine wall and the trophoblast over the inner cell mass contacts the endometrium. This orientation of the blastocyst is very important because the inner cell mass needs to be very close to the blood vessels and nutrient supply within the endometrium, as it has high metabolic demands and is part of the blastocyst that will eventually go on to develop into the embryo. Adhesion generally occurs on or around the 7th day after fertilisation and results in the blastocyst being firmly fixed to the uterine epithelium. Following this attachment, the cells of the trophoblast begin to release digestive enzymes that dig a hole inside the endometrium to enable access for the developing embryo. These trophoblast cells start invading between the endometrial cells, which initially attaches the blastocyst to the uterine surface and then gradually buries itself deeper into the uterine wall. This is called invasion, and during this time, more changes take place to the cellular trophoblast. The inner cell mass separates from the trophoblast, creating a richly nutritious fluid-filled chamber called the amniotic cavity. Once inside the implantation hole, the endometrium is then sealed off. By about day 10, the entire developing embryo is completely inside the endometrium.